Writing report comments can be really challenging, particularly the time of the year that we often have to write them. So it's the end of a term or semester or the end of the year when as teachers we are absolutely exhausted and often frustrated because the things we want to say in the report comment we actually can't. We're going to look at how do we bypass this? How do we make sure that we write what we want to say but in the best and most appropriate and effective way, and also that it has the outcome we wanted to achieve? So we all know that feedback is important, but what we need to remember is the feedback on the report is not just going to the parent, it's also going to the learner. And we need to make sure that the learner actually looks at the report and understands how they can improve, because the whole idea of a report is really to show the parent and the learner how to improve. We also need to remember as teachers that a report is actually a legal document. So we must make sure that the report is accurate. One of the ways of doing this is to ensure that our comment actually reflects the code that the learner received. So often, a learner will get a high code for something, yet the comment is not very complimentary. And then what happens is the parents look at this report and think, but why should I worry about the comment? My child's doing really well. So how do we ensure that this doesn't happen? Well, the first is to make sure that every report comment we write addresses two approaches. Addresses both the academics of the learner and the learner's behavior. So in a case like this, you might have a child who is strong academic, but his behavior is not great. Or vice versa. You might have a kid who's got amazing behavior in the classroom, yet is really weak academically. We need to make sure that the report addresses both of these. So what are the general things we should consider when we're giving feedback in a report? Well, let's look at what we shouldn't say or shouldn't do. The first is don't label the child. Don't get too personal, and be very careful not to use jargon. You want the parents to understand the report, and often they don't understand the jargon. What should we do? Make sure that we are fair, that our judgment is fair. Use facts and evidence that we have and that we can back up. Most importantly, give parents hope, particularly with these kids who are struggling, or particularly with naughty kids. Give them hope. Make sure our assessments that we've done are accurate, and that also comes back to making sure that the results that we give are accurate, and be realistic and precise. Sometimes there's certain things we want to say, just make sure we say it in the right way, but don't shy away from saying the things that need to be said. Now let's have a look again at those two approaches we said. For every report, we need to look at the academics of the learner as well as the behavior. Now let's have a look at the academics. How do we go about making sure that we say the right things to ensure improvement? Well, the best is to use what we call the SWA technique. And this technique points out the learner's strengths, the learner's weaknesses, but most importantly, it states the action that needs to take place for improvement to occur. So let's have a look at each of these. And in fact, every report comment, when we talk about academics, should deal with S, W, and A. So let's look at first the strengths. How do we comment on the learner's strengths? Well, we need to comment on, first of all, what the learner's good at, what they've achieved. You could comment on how they've progressed, what they maybe have mastered, what they've excelled at, and maybe even if you've got nothing to say in terms of how well they've done, maybe what they actually enjoy doing in the class. We also need to comment on the weaknesses. Now, the weaknesses are often a little bit more difficult to comment on because we need to tell them what the weaknesses are, but we need to do it nicely. So here are some examples that you can use, and we don't necessarily have to give too much detail, but we just need to touch on it. And in every report situation, try and touch on some of the weaknesses, because every learner does have weaknesses. In some cases, you might want to just say he hasn't mastered something or he hasn't progressed in something, and even more importantly, particularly the younger learners, he doesn't necessarily enjoy doing something, and it might be something that's important for his development, so you want to point that out early. Probably the most important is commenting on what the learner needs to do or what needs to be done. And often we forget this in report comments. It's no point in just commenting on the positives and negatives or the strengths and the weaknesses. We need to say, what can we do about this? What can the parents do? What can the learners do? And even more so, what are we going to do as a teacher? So here are 3 examples of ways to write things. Learner might need to spend more time reading. Learner needs to improve their study methods. The The third one, maybe just even consolidation of what is done in class. Basically what you're saying there is the learner's not doing their homework and they need to do a little bit more at home. But it's just a nicer way of saying it. So make sure in all your comments, when you're talking about the learner's academics, that you include strengths, weaknesses, but most importantly, the action. Now let's have a look at how do we comment on learners' behavior. And this is always a difficult one because every single learner has got aspects of their behavior that they can improve. And I like to use what we call the sandwich technique. The sandwich technique allows the negative behavior to be reported on, but also encourages and motivates the learner to improve. So let's see how this works. As with a sandwich, you've got a slice of bread on the bottom, a slice of bread on the top, and in the middle you've got all the dressings. Now, in the same way, the sandwich technique works with behavior. We start with a compliment. Start by complimenting the learner on something they do well, in some cases, however small it may be. Then go into the negative or the criticism. State the negative behavior. And then lastly, end off with another aspect that they do well or comment on a positive effect that good or improved behavior will have. Sometimes with some learners, there isn't much to comment on in terms of positive behavior, but then comment on the positive effect. So using these two techniques really make it easier to feed back to the parents. But most importantly, it makes sure that all feedback we give leads to an improvement, because that's ultimately what we want from these reports and report comments. We want the learners to improve. So use these strategies next time you're writing report comments, and just remember to always comment on the learner's academics and the learner's behavior.